this is starting to look like more than just a coincidence. This time, a top aerospace engineer, Dr. Ayub Intizari, who worked on developing missiles and drones, died mysteriously after attending a dinner party. Iranian authorities are conducting a manhunt for the suspect, who is believed to have already fled the country. Word of Intizari's death comes in the same week that Iranian opposition media reported the mysterious death of a nuclear expert, Dr. Kamran Malafour, who worked at the Natanz facility in Isfahan, and the death of a colonel from the IRGC's Quds Force, Ali Ismail Zadeh, who suspiciously fell from the roof of his home. While Iranian officials claim he committed suicide, Ismail Zadeh was a close colleague of Colonel Hassan Sayad Khodaei, the commander of the Quds Force's 840 unit, responsible for carrying out attacks abroad against foreign targets, including Israelis, who was recently killed outside his home in Tehran. In the meantime, Iran appears to be trying to seek its promised revenge, despite Israel insisting it was not involved, with Thailand's royal police issuing a secret order to be on the lookout for Iranian spies, citing the arrest of an Iranian national in Indonesia last year, suspected of plotting attacks.
So let's get to it. Productive or mere psychological? Dear gentlemen, you know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we pick up the debate right after. So, Amir, please take the lead.
Well, regarding the poisoning, if that's the method, it would be very dangerous on Israel's part, because you remember the Skripal and Navalny poisoning attacks by the Russians, which brought sanctions upon them. So hopefully Israel will not use this tool. But anyway, it's the conflict between Washington and Jerusalem rather than Tehran and Jerusalem about the return to the 2015 nuclear deal.
And we'll get to that in a second, of course. James, your take?
Well, it's not clear to me that the most recent round of assassinations, if in fact they were conducted by Israel, do amount to a strategic response. To me, it seems like more of a tactical delaying action, but if it turns out that the time that it delays Iran in terms of a nuclear thing, then that could turn out to be a strategic achievement.
And last but definitely not least, Arash, your thoughts?
For better or worse, Israel has this policy of, of doing actions like assassinating people that it considers dangerous for its interests. I mean, I would say the most striking thing here is that some of these actions are probably by Israel, some maybe not, but the regime really feels to be on the siege here, and it also has shown really its glaring security gaps, basically. It claims to be the country that, despite all its problems, it provides security against Israel, but it's so bad at it that has to really have done something with its confidence about its own rule.
Right. So, gentlemen, from this point onwards, please feel free to interact. And in this respect, let's start the conversation by asking a very simple question. Iran has invested a whole lot of efforts and resources in establishing this foundation to facilitate the development of its nuclear program. Is taking 1 or 2 or even 10 scientists really something that can undermine Iran's ability to reach nuclear capability? Arash?
Look, the reality is that it's going to push it back. It's not going to immediately stop it, but it does have an effect, right? The personnel are very important to any nuclear program, so it's going to push it back. But it's not obviously it's not a long-term panacea to the problems of the Iranian nuclear development.
James, it's not one person holding the knowledge, but again, a very elaborated, thorough web that facilitates those achievements on behalf of Iran. Is it beneficial to take down scientists at all?
I think perhaps one scientist that probably was targeted by Israel, although it's not confirmed, was Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was a very key operative within Iran's program. And I think removing him may have delayed that program. But aside from that, I'm not sure that many of the other attacks would have issued a strategic defeat I think they do show Iran that it has been penetrated, and that could be a very good thing if it dissuades them from some kind of a covert nuclear breakout, because the Iranians have to be wondering if they are hitting very top secret nuclear scientists and members of the Quds Force, what else is known?
And touching that point exactly, Amir, we all remember the unveiling or revelation of the Iran nuclear archives with this high-profile press conference on behalf of then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Intelligence definitely plays a key role here, even if just for the sake of recruiting global players to join the quote-unquote Israeli raison d'etat in this respect. So maybe just the display of the intelligence capability here is significant enough.
Well, it may be in the long run, but up to now, the archive caper, which you mentioned, was counterproductive, because all it showed was that the U.S. intelligence assessment was correct, and that as far back as 2003, the Iranians, fearing an American invasion following the Iraq War, stopped their so-called Imad program. Now, on several occasions, eliminating key people was indeed beneficial for whoever was behind the targeted killings. You remember Gerald Bull, the Canadian engineer in 1990 helping Saddam, or there are several others, but usually knowledge is quite prevalent, and it's been 77 years since Hiroshima. And nuclear know-how is spread all over the world. It is true that working on a warhead is not theoretical physics, but nevertheless, a nation bent on reaching the military nuclear threshold will do it. And as the Israeli military intelligence chiefs keep saying, Iran is yet to decide on going nuclear.
But staying with the spotlight on Israel for a second, Arash, do you think that, again, those alleged assassinations are underlining or undermining Israeli legitimacy worldwide, that is, when we're talking about the image? Is it losing or gaining from the ambiguity surrounding those assassinations?
I think, with all actions of Israel that are questionable, the assassinations are perhaps not on the top list of things that makes it less legitimate, especially because there is there's sympathy against the Iranian nuclear program. But of course, Israel has done this throughout history. The beautiful book by Ronan Bergman shows that is obviously a violation of international law, but different states violate international law, and I think this is not a particular point of Israel losing a lot of legitimacy because of the goal that it has, as I said there, is shared by many people. But I want to just emphasize what the previous speaker said, that it's really true that at the end of the day, if a country as big as Iran and as resourceful as Iran truly wants to get to a nuclear weapon and makes that political decision, it would be, such actions won't be able to stop it. So that's a fact that it's easy to forget sometimes. But at the end of the day, if Ayatollah Khamenei decides Iran wants to go to nuclear, it can do so probably in a year from now on.
And speaking of Ayatollah Khamenei, only this past Saturday, he was blaming foreign enemies, and I'm quoting, seeking to overthrow the Islamic Republic, blaming it for piracy over this takeover of oil tankers, Greek oil tankers, and by saying foreign enemies, using psychological warfare, he's obviously talking the U.S. and most notably Israel. Is this message directed to the international arena or domestically, James?
I think it's primarily oriented toward the domestic audience, that the Ayatollahs are extremely reluctant to admit that they are so unpopular because of their own policies. Their own people are turning away from them, and so they need an external enemy in order to retain some of their some shred of legitimacy in the eyes of their own people. And that's why, some of these incidents of mysterious deaths, if they are assassinations, do undermine one of the claims to legitimacy that this very repressive regime has, that they are supposedly safeguarding Iran's interests.
Yeah, well, different players, similar tactics, I would dare to say. Arash, is the Iranian public buying it?
I mean, the Iranian public knows that, it's very funny. The Iranian regime calls anything it doesn't like supported by West or Israel. Of course, the Iranian public is not buying it. They know, and by they, I mean a very wide range of public, even those who might have been supportive of the government before, know that if the people come out, it's because of the high prices, it's because of the government incompetence, it's because of the falling economy of Iran, it's because of the fact that the Iranians today are so clearly and by any measure much more worse off than, not only they're much more worse off than 20 years ago, they're much worse off than they would have even imagined. So, the claims of the government, again, that the West is behind the protests have no credence for anybody who pays attention. And as we said before, it's claimed to be a great defense against Israel is also ludicrous, because the way Israel operates inside Iran, some police forces can't operate this easily inside some cities in many countries. So clearly they're not even very good at protecting the country.
Right. And then before we wrap up this part of the debate, Amir, the Iranians are now threatening retaliation to an extent against Israelis abroad, the security alert level being stepped up. Beneficial to target Israeli citizens when we're talking or trying to think from the Iranian perspective?
Well, that's the whole idea of terrorizing, announcing it beforehand. Israel does not announce, but takes action. And the Iranians apparently are doing it the other way around. But let me throw a counterintuitive idea at you, Ellie. The very concern that Khamenei has pronounced regarding his regime may be the basis for talks between Iran and Israel, because what the Ayatollahs want above all is to safeguard their revolutionary regime, and Israel, of course, wants to have its national security guarded. So there you have at least the outline of some probe regarding negotiations.
Well, as always, Amir, it's a wag the dog, war or peace version.